Hello everyone, my name's Tom. I'm the Business Development Manager from EventsAIR, and I'd like to say thank you for joining into my session today to talk about hybrid events and the challenges and opportunities that hybrid events pose to event planners. So as all of you will know, this year has been very much about a transition to virtual events. So virtual events caught us all by surprise with with hybrid events coming in 2021. But virtual events really caught us by surprise with COVID coming really out of nowhere and landing on us and forcing event planners to pivot to a virtual event. Much like IT and CMA this year has had to become a purely virtual event. But we see the future moving forward being very much about hybrid events. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, hybrid is the concept of an event with an in-person audience, live, like we've always run events, and also a virtual online audience as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. About me, my name's Tom. I'm based in Brisbane, Australia. Here in Australia, we've been very, very fortunate to be quite blessed with how COVID is currently tracking. And currently, our restrictions are very minimal in most parts of the country, which is absolutely fantastic. And what it means is we're getting back to meeting in person, face to face again. We're getting back to the business of events. And that means we're now looking towards hybrid, and we really see that as the future. So many of our customers have actually run hybrid events themselves, and almost all of them are planning hybrid events for 2021. So what I'd like to do today is talk about the journey so far, how we got to where we are today, then talk about the future, 2021, how we really see that being all about hybrid. Then I'll talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities that hybrid events present to event planners. And then I'd like to talk about how to run a successful hybrid event and some of the complexities in doing so. So please do, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump into the live Q&A. Or feel free to chat in the discussion forum. I can see a lot of people saying hello. There's a hello from Russia and India. So it's my pleasure to present to you all around the world. And I hope you find my presentation today useful. So first of all, before we get into the content, a little bit about us. For those of you who don't know, you're currently using our technology. This is the OnAIR platform that we developed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that journey. We're an event management software company with teams and offices and customers all around the world, as well as our high profile trade events, conferencing, and professional conference organizer Mice Business. We're also used by world events. So world events include London Olympics, APEC summits, G20s, and so on and so forth. Our experience spans about 30 years, and I will talk about that. Our current platform used by TTG Asia and the IT and CMA team is actually the 6th generation of event technology that we've created. It's about 30 years in the making, and it powers some of the world's largest events. And as we'll explore today, hybrid is really about in-person attendees and virtual attendees. And what you'll find there is a business like IT and CMA and TTG always ran this show in person. I've had the pleasure to attend for 3 years running now, and now having to pivot to it virtual. So they've used our technology for many years to run their in-person event, including business meeting matching, the attendee apps, exhibitor management, and so on and so forth. And like lots of our customers around the world, they've had to pivot to a virtual event environment. And that's what our platform OnAIR is all about. So where did we start and how did we get here? Well, as I said, we've been around for about 30 years and our technology has been powering events for that time. It's really an end-to-end feature set. So when you registered for today's event, probably many months or weeks ago, you used our technology. and all the way through the communications, the on-site check-in for a live event, and the virtual check-in has all been powered through EventsAIR. So going back to 1988, we started with a platform called simply Events. And Events was a registration system for event planners. Then the internet became more and more important, and we reinvented that software to become Events Pro. So we reacted to what was required in the industry and developed a platform that allowed for online registrations. In 1994, online registrations were still very new and not a massive part of the event space, but obviously became very important. In 2014, it became all about the attendee app and cloud computing. And that's why we once again reinvented the entire platform from the ground up to deploy EventsAIR. And as I said, EventsAIR is the platform that's powered IT and CMA for many years. And that's really an end-to-end event management platform. Then we snap forward to 2020, and as we all know, everything turned to chaos. The events industry really started going into free fall because of this thing called coronavirus. And a lot of our customers came to us needing a solution. Their events and their clients' events were being canceled or at very best postponed. And we knew we needed to do something to support the industry and more importantly, to support our customers. So very quickly, we developed a platform called OnAIR. And now in its third version, and about 6 or 7 or 8 months out in the industry, I lose track, 2020 has been quite a year. It's a very robust, powerful virtual event solution that piggybacks off a lot of the tools in EventsAIR, the end-to-end live event solution. And the good news when we started this project was that most of the event lifecycle is already virtual. So for our event planners, when they went to plan an event, they would have to do some social media marketing, some EDMs and direct marketing, and typically build an event website to get people to register, to build excitement, and to build hype. Then they would ideally be getting their attendees, speakers, sponsors, and exhibitors to register through forms and portals. So getting their attendees in through the door. They'd then communicate with those attendees, send out confirmation emails and reminders and alerts. And then pre-event, they would do some run sheets for their team, set up name badges if required, and then create some reporting. Now that's a live event where we get there and we check in and we print our name badges, we go to the functions, and we do all those things that we really love about physical events. So what we really had to do is we needed to take that entire element that we already had and create the at event time component and make that virtual. So when we set out to develop this, we knew it needed to be more than just a webinar, more than just a broadcast, more than just a Zoom session. It needed to be interactive. It needed to be secure. It needed to be fun and engaging. And that's really where OnAIR was born, with virtual networking, virtual exhibitor marketplaces, virtual sessions, and a lot more, a lot of which you've probably already experienced in your time at IT and CMA 2020. So we went out to market with that, we tested it, we delivered it. Our lovely customers like TTG and IT and CMA were right there with us, testing it, learning about virtual events. Because as any of you in the room will know, anyone who's run a virtual event, there's a lot to learn. So that's really, I think, one of the things we went through with our customers is learning with them, hearing from them, and understanding what they needed as well. So just to look at some of those features, you have obviously speaker sessions like I'm presenting today that are interactive, secure, they're pre-recorded or live like I'm doing today. I'm coming to you live. And as you'll see on the right, live polling and Q&A is active, so you can actually ask those questions as you need to. There's also the full webinar style like I'm doing today, or you can actually send through from an entire studio, which is another really interesting way to create your content. Virtual exhibitions, I hope you've all had the chance to pop over to the virtual exhibitors and meet with some of IT and CMA's valued sponsors. We're definitely available for a chat. If you come by and request a meeting, I'd urge you to do that. What it does, if you haven't experienced it already, as an attendee, you can request a meeting, and if the exhibit is available, they can accept that meeting, and it starts up an instant video chat. So the ability to share my product or my destination or my service to you, the attendee. One-to-one networking is a lot of fun also. That's a great way to recreate that part that we really, really miss about physical events, and that's the networking, the shaking of hands, the meeting of people. And that's, I think, something that virtual events will always struggle to recreate, but it's something that Events on Air does as best as possible by creating those real connections. It'll never replace a real life event. We all can't wait to get back to meeting in person, but it's the next best thing for virtual events. Following on from that, virtual tables is another great feature where I can jump onto a table with my fellow attendees or sponsors and network and connect with one-to-one video chats as well. And that's a really fantastic tool to build engagement, make it fun, and make it really engaging for your attendees. The live host is a tool that you can use to engage with your customers throughout the journey. E-posters, for any of you who organize scientific conferences, you would understand what abstracts and posters are all about. For our scientific associations and our professional conference organizer customers, we developed an e-posters platform that actually allows our customers to recreate that poster presentation. And finally, gamification ties it all together. This is where it gets really, really fun. You can put points and prizes behind all of the activities in your virtual event, and your attendees can then compete for those points and prizes. It's a great way to encourage live polling, Q&A. It's a great way to encourage attendees to visit your exhibitors by putting points and prizes behind it. And finally, AIRCast Studio. That's actually what I'm using today to broadcast out to you all. So it's an interface like running a Zoom session, but much more advanced and much more interactive than a Zoom session. I can actually bring my fellow colleagues up onto the stage. I can bring guest speakers in and have much more control than I ever would through a simple Zoom session. But it's still accessible and easy that I don't need to be an expert AV technician. And honestly, when I speak to customers, that's one of the main challenges that they mention, is that audiovisual setup and the need for a studio is what puts them off doing a live event, a virtual event. So I'd just like to ask all of you, what's the biggest challenge of running a virtual event for you? Do you see it as the audiovisual setup or the attendee expectations? Or is there another reason you find virtual events challenging? Some interesting results coming in there. I might just go and share that into my screen here. That's interesting that attendee expectations actually looks like it might be one of the main concerns. It's almost an equal split there. And I think that's a really valid concern. I'll talk a little bit more about attendee expectations and the expectations of attendees to be able to interact, what they expect from a virtual event. But really, I think audiovisual is one of the key challenges that most event planners have had to pivot to. Because what I like to actually tell my customers, and this may sound a little bit crazy to you, those of you who haven't run a virtual event, but a virtual event is actually much, much more simple than an in-person physical event. Let me explain. Something like IT and CMA as an example. You think about all of you lovely people from around the world flying into the city, accommodation, travel, the logistics, the venue, the stand setup. There are so many moving parts that for me, someone who's never run a virtual event, that's a really scary prospect to think I would have to run something like that. Whereas a virtual event actually has quite a few, well, far less moving parts to it. And once you understand the technology, it's actually pretty straightforward to do that. So it's really interesting to hear your feedback on that as well. And AIRCast Studio is a really great way to minimize the complexity, minimize the cost, importantly, and really make your events look great, interactive for your speakers and attendees, but without costing you a lot of money. So since we launched our platform, we've had over 150,000 attendees through the gates, and all of you are really also part of that journey with us. So we want to thank you for joining in today. So let's talk about some of the threats and opportunities of a virtual event. I'm saying virtual because that's what really we've had experience with in the last 6 months. Many of our customers, as I said, are pivoting to hybrid, but it's still very early days for hybrid events. And a lot of the threats and opportunities for virtual carry across to a hybrid event where we have both a virtual and an in-person event. So some of those threats is, first of all, that it's uncharted territory. When you've never run a virtual event, you think, where do I start? It's very daunting. Another threat, I think, and this is starting to change, but the expectation of free. If it's online, it should be free. And I think that's really starting to change amongst our audiences and amongst the industry, where good quality content, people are much more willing and ready to pay for it. It's very interesting when you think of it like what the music industry went through over about 15 years, the events industry has gone through in about 6 months. That challenge of pivoting to virtual, pivoting to online, just like the music industry did, but then monetizing that. And a lot of our customers are having challenges with that, or had challenges initially in monetizing their virtual events. But that's starting to change. You obviously can't charge as much for a virtual event, but you can definitely charge something if the quality is good. Another damaging part of going virtual is lower sponsorship revenue and increased attrition. Attrition is where you have people register but not show up for the event. And there's a whole raft of other challenges like bandwidth issues and technical briefings as well. But then we look at the opportunities, and the opportunities are significant. So one of the interesting parts, I think, is the increase in attendee numbers. So our customers, having replaced a traditional in-person conference with a virtual replacement, saw on average a 23% increase in their attendees. And that makes sense when you think about it because you have a much wider audience. The cost is lower, so you can market your event to many more people. And that's quite an exciting part of virtual events. Another really exciting part is recurring revenue. And if we use the music industry as an example, once again, they transitioned to a model of selling one CD and that money's gone, that product's gone, but that money's gone forever, to a recurring revenue model like Spotify and YouTube Music and Apple Music. And it's the same with virtual events. So if your content is really good quality, what you can do is you can sell on-demand access to the event. You charge less for it, but you give those attendees the ability to go in and watch that content on demand. And the analytics of a virtual event, I think, are the really key part. So for example, an exhibitor who wants to know who's picked up a brochure off their stand at a physical event like IT and CMA last year, without being a little bit creepy, I can't really know who that person is that picked up a brochure and may be interested in my product. At a virtual event, we can track that and we can allow our exhibitors to understand who's walked by their stand, virtually walked by, who picked up a brochure virtually, whereas in a traditional event, you wouldn't have that. Not to mention the tracking of speakers and engagement at functions, which is all very, very powerful in a virtual event. So let's talk more about hybrid. So hybrid really isn't just the future, it's actually happening now. So as I said at the start, we are very, very lucky here in Australia and in New Zealand that our COVID cases are really, really low and have been for some time. And as a result, the government has opened up restrictions on business events. We can actually now meet in person again in all of our capital cities bar one. And that's fantastic news for the events industry. So what our customers are doing now is they're actually running hybrid events in that environment. What they're doing is they're taking all of the learnings from the virtual event journey that we've been on in the last 6 months, and they're building it into a live event to put them together. So to talk about some of the hybrid events our customers are running, the first one's just the hub model, for lack of a better word. The hub model is, as we'd expect, a virtual event where we have a centralized location with our speakers and our audience, And then we have this broadcast out all over the world. As far as hybrid events go, that's the much simpler model where we have one physical location broadcasting out to many, many digital locations. Then there's the hub and spoke model. The hub and spoke model is much more complicated. The hub and spoke model is where you have a central location and multiple smaller locations, all of which have attendees in them. And one of our larger customers actually ran one of these recently. It was a very sophisticated event and incredibly impressive. They had audiences all around the world. So, all around Australia. So one in Sydney, one in Melbourne, one in Brisbane, and they had a centralized studio. And the challenge there is the people watching from Sydney want to be able to see what the main stage is doing, but the main stage also wants to broadcast from Sydney and bring in that audience, and the connection between all of those is quite complex. So as far as hybrid events go, the hub and spoke model is much more challenging, but it can be much more rewarding because rather than everyone who's in Brisbane sitting alone at their computer watching the session, they can actually be together. They can be having cocktails and fun and doing all those things we love about physical events while still feeling connected to their interstate colleagues. And as the world opens up, we hope to see more of this where perhaps international borders are closed. That's perfect example is here in Australia. Our international borders will remain closed at this stage for some time. But in Australia, we can travel a bit more, which is great. So there's a potential for a hub and spoke event with audiences in New Zealand or Singapore or wherever it is and managing all of that. So if we look at the actual content that we're broadcasting out, let's home in on speakers for a second. Okay, so if we look at a traditional webcast, and in fact, these screenshots are taken from a video that was about 7 years ago. And, in a sense, hybrid has been going forever, but the virtual attendees have got a pretty boring show. All they've been able to see is the screen, maybe the slides, and it's a one-way flow of information, and I can watch what that speaker has to say. So if we look at how that situation set up, we have a speaker and their screen in front of an audience. Traditional event, as we always have. Then we have a camera and a microphone hooked up to her, and that's broadcasting out to the audience, but it's also broadcasting to a back-end mixing desk. As you can see, they've also got a camera taking in the slides. That's a very old-fashioned way of capturing her slide contents. They've actually set up a camera pointing at the slides on the screen behind her. And that's being mixed and broadcast out to the attendee audience. This was 7 years ago. I very much doubt this event was broadcast live. It was almost certainly recorded and uploaded later. Then we look at a more modern broadcast, and this is from one of our customers running an event literally just today, where they had four studio audience members in front of a studio. They then had a camera and microphone set up to that, pushing back to a mixing desk, and they had a virtual speaker mixed into that virtual mixing desk. As you can see, it looks like he's in a little window at the back there. He's actually at home on his computer being broadcast being mixed onto the broadcast there and then pushed out to the audience back home. Okay, so that is a more sophisticated modern style of broadcasting. But the good news is you don't have to overcomplicate things. And that's kind of what I want to jump into now. So if we look at a really simple hybrid event, we have a speaker in front of an audience, a camera and a microphone, and we push it out to the people at home. Simple, right? But what if you have 3 concurrent sessions going? Okay, you've got 3 speakers, 3 sets of audiences, 3 sets of AV, and we're now mixing that all and pushing it out. And what about if one of those speakers is actually talking on a panel with some international speakers who are dialing in remotely, one from Australia and one from Canada, let's say? You see the complexity really starts to increase here. And what about if the audience back home want to ask questions? And what if the audience in the audience want to ask questions and all of a sudden does not compute and it gets really, really complex really, really quickly. So my suggestion to my customers who are embarking on hybrid for the first time is to keep it really, really simple. to really minimize those moving parts and keep it as simple as possible. The other piece of advice that I would give is to have an end-to-end toolkit. What I mean by that is a platform like EventsAIR and OnAIR, which we're using today, that incorporates registrations, on-site, the attendee app, and the virtual component as well. Those last two, the attendee app and the virtual component, are the pivotal pieces, because essentially what we need is a system where the attendee app for the people in the room is live polling, is Q&A, and is messaging other attendees. And that's linked up to the online approach that we're using. So let's snap forward and pretend that today's event is an in-person event as well as a virtual. So let's say perhaps next year, IT and CMA run their event hybrid. Okay. Now, if you're watching from home like you are today, you would use the discussion forum, the live Q&A, and the live polling, much like we have today, to interact with me, the speaker, and with one another. The people in the room would be using the attendee app to do the same. So if you ask the question and people in the room like that question, they can upvote it and downvote it. And likewise, people in the room ask a question and you want that question answered, you can upvote it and downvote it. And it makes the online audience really feel like they're in the room, like they're experiencing it. Because if you ask that question and then the speaker turns around and answers that question, even though you're at home, hey, I'm actually at a live event. And that's really, really fantastic. So for sessions, live polling, and Q&A, having those two synchronized saves the event planner a whole lot of heartache, but it also makes the experience much more robust and much more engaging for the attendees, both the people online and the people in the room as well. For exhibitors, exhibitors is another, I guess, challenge. We had a customer in New Zealand who ran a traditional conference where they would have 1 hour session and then a tea break where, a morning tea break where the attendees would mingle with the exhibitors during that break. So what they did in a hybrid event is they actually had, when the attendees at the physical event were in the session, that's when the virtual attendees met with the exhibitors. Because the exhibitors at this show would usually just be sitting on the stand bored, waiting for someone to come by, waiting for the session to finish. So what they would do is they'd open up their laptops and meet with the virtual attendees. Then when the physical attendees came out of the session, they would put down their laptops and meet with the physical ones. At the same time, those virtual attendees were actually then watching the pre-record of that session that they just missed. So there's really interesting ways you can deploy hybrid events to make the most out of both of those audiences. One-to-one networking is another really important part as well. So if I'm at home by myself in lockdown, I want to be able to connect with other delegates, and the app and the online platform facilitate that. So in summary, I'd just like to say hybrid events are here in our part of the world at least, and they will be here to stay. There are a lot of challenges to hybrid. So all of the pain that you've felt in running a virtual event is doubled with a hybrid event, unfortunately. But with the right technology, the execution can be really quite seamless and smooth. And with the right technology, that is integrated end-to-end technology, the experience for your attendees will be much richer. Don't think of your attendees online as someone sitting back watching a one-way stream of communication. Really try to engage with them and try to make the experience enjoyable and engaging for them. And as we say, attendee expectations. So Pankaj, you're absolutely right. Attendee expectations are always that challenge. I think that's one thing we can do is, try and deliver as much as possible without promising the world. And that's it from me. I want to say a big thank you to everyone. Do add me on LinkedIn if you've liked my content here. I do try to post quite actively to LinkedIn about virtual and hybrid events and the lessons we're learning. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone. Thank you, Tina. I appreciate your kind words there. And to everyone else who's joined in. Please enjoy the rest of the show. And if you do have any questions, feel free to stop by the stand and find out a little bit more about our technology. I'd be more than happy to have a quick chat and even organize a demo. Thanks, everyone. Have a really lovely day, and we'll chat next time we speak. Thank you.